Hello, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, joined by Sheldon Richmond, the vice president of FFF, and this is the Libertarian Angle, the show, as you know, on the internet that brings you the libertarian perspectives on the burning issues of the day, and especially as you'll see today. Sheldon, I read an article in the New York Times over the weekend that the Fed, the new chairman of the Fed, Janet Yellen, and many of the mainstream economists are now advocating a annual increase of inflation. And they think that inflation is going to be the panacea to the economic woes affecting the American economy, and that this is the route to go. I mean, this is standard status claptrap. Now, I think it's important at the outset that we distinguish between what we really mean by inflation and what they mean by inflation. You know, oftentimes they conflate the rising prices with expansion of the monetary sphere. That is, more money, more credit, more artificially induced money, more printed money in the popular usage of the term means inflation. But then when you see the prices rising and reflect to that, they refer to that as inflation. So I think for purposes of this conversation, maybe we ought to talk in terms of price inflation and monetary inflation to get the terms straight. But this is standard stuff that they've been doing for decades, you know, just injecting this new artificial prosperity into the economy by expanding money and credit, and then the prices start rising, and they consider that prosperity. So I thought we ought to address this from a libertarian perspective, because you're certainly not going to get that perspective in the mainstream media. What do you think?
Well, you're right. It just shows you how they've learned, or I'd like to say, learned. So we shouldn't be surprised that they don't learn from the past and from. This is just classic monetary crankism that predates Keynes. I mean, Keynes picked it up, but people were saying this long before him, that if economic activity and growth doesn't seem vigorous enough, it must be insufficient money, insufficient consumer demand, and then the government and its central bank are look to provide more money and juice consumer demand. I mean, it's the same old song that for hundreds of years, money cranks have been saying this, and good economists, and most particularly Austrian economists, have pointed out that you can't create real prosperity by creating money. I mean, it just doesn't do that. What it ends up doing is raising prices, and it doesn't raise prices in some even way. I mean, the textbook always talks about inflation as if the helicopter flies overhead and evenly spreads dollar bills around to everybody. But even if that were to happen, money prices would go up as people had more money in their wallets, so they wouldn't be ahead. But in fact, that's not the way it goes. It's not an even distribution of new money, which, as I say, wouldn't do any good anyway. What it is the money gets injected at particular points, which means special interests end up getting the money sooner. They then can go out and do what they want to do under the old prices, so that it's a benefit to them. Like the counterfeiter who first goes spending his money before prices have changed. Yeah, he has an increase in purchasing power. The counterfeiter does, and so these early recipients of the fiat money, the new fiat money, will benefit. But as that money filters through the economy, and the rest of us need to get more money, the prices then by then have gone up. So we haven't experienced an increase in purchasing power, and in the meantime, we've experienced a loss in purchasing power, because when the prices are going up before we've even gotten any of the new money, we're now facing the new higher prices with our previous incomes, which means we've lost purchasing power. So it's a form of theft. If we want to be polite, we could say it's an implicit form of taxation, but let's really be honest, it's a form of theft. And notice in that article, the economists were saying the reason we need inflation is because it'll raise companies' profits. Well, it'll raise the first early companies' profits, but eventually when prices and costs of materials go up, it'll turn out that those are illusory profits, and it will also turn out that malinvestment will be made because it will mislead. Here's the basic thing. If you tamper with the price system, you will mislead people and lead to a misaligned economy, an economy that's not properly aligned with consumer demand. And yet they don't want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and we've seen that time and time again where they end up inflating these balloons in certain sectors of the economy where they're injecting this new money, and ultimately the thing bursts. And what do? They always blame it on, the failure of free enterprise. We didn't have enough regulation and so forth. I think what's going on here is that, the welfare warfare state has just turned out to be a massive failure. They've waged this war on poverty for decades. We have more poverty than ever. And you've got this stagnant economy as a result of this overarching role that the federal government plays in economic activity. I mean, let's face it, the federal government plays a dominant role in the economy. It taxes enormous amounts of money from the private sector. It hires an enormous amount of people in both the warfare state and the welfare state. And this way of life is now starting to crack. You can tell by the fact that hardly anyone saves any money anymore. And as we libertarians, we Austrians have pointed out for so long, the key to rising standards of living, the key to rising prosperity is savings. That's what brings in the productive capital. That's what makes people more productive. That's what starts raising real wage rates instead of inflationary wage rates. It's really the foundation of a dynamic, prosperous society. So instead of that, you have this massive tax system, welfare state redistributive system that just is suppressing people. It's suppressing their economic activities, it's suppressing vitality. So what do they say? The solution to this is to just start printing the money up. Let's just start, injecting new money, and boy, this will start pumping up that balloon again. And we all know what's around the corner. We're going to see another burst of artificial prosperity. Good times are here again. But as you point out, it's just a distortion. They send people in the wrong direction with respect to investment. People start expanding their economic activity in that area where the new money's coming in, and all of a sudden down the road, there's not sufficient wealth, prosperity to sustain that artificial injection, and then the bubble bursts. And then we're back to where we were again with the new proposals. Hey, we need to do this again. I mean, this has been going on for how long? Decades, ever since the Federal Reserve got established.
Yeah, and it's going to be self-defeating even in a fairly short run, because if they actually do start injecting money that gets out into the real economy. They've been injecting money. We know that. They've been buying, it's an open policy, $85 billion in securities, government securities, mortgage-backed securities, for many months now. This is the latest of the QEs. But that money's not been getting out into the economy. For one reason is that the Fed has been paying interest on that money to the banks if they leave it in their Fed checking account, bank accounts. So in effect, they're creating money and then borrowing it right back from the bank. So it's not been getting out into the economy. That's why we're not seeing any kind of inflation, price inflation as a result of $85 billion a month. You'd expect to see prices skyrocketing. That's because the money's not getting out. Now, there's not a high demand for loans. Businesses worried, to use Bob Higgs's term, because of regime uncertainty, and it's all uncertainty. A lot of it is not. A lot of it is certainty about the new policies that have been put in place by the government. You got the health care, which is increasing costs for a lot of employers, and also Dodd-Frank, which has created a cloud of uncertainty about a future regulation regarding finance. And so you don't see a vigorous demand for business loans. That's where the slowdown has come back. Actually, it's not from a lack of consumer spending. Consumer spending came back fairly quickly after the recession of 2008, 2009. And so, even in their terms, it's not that there's been inadequate consumer spending. It's that businesses have been running in place because they're not willing to take big risks when this cloud of policy uncertainty is over their heads. So that's where the issue goes. And if you understand that, then you realize what the solution is. First of all, get rid of regulations, get rid of privileges, really free the market, and then you'll see people be willing to invest. Investment is inherently risky because of the uncertainty with the passage of time, but government just makes it even worse because no one knows what regulation or what the taxes will be next year, or that just piles uncertainty upon the natural uncertainty and makes people even more reluctant to take chances. So there's the problem. It's not that we're not spending enough, and they don't want to understand that because they want us to believe the Fed is the source, or the government in general is the source of economic vitality and prosperity, and so it's going to step in to save the day, even though it's the one that created the peril in the first place.
Well, and I read in that article that their bond buyback scheme is based on the rate of unemployment. And that when unemployment gets down to a certain level, 6% or something like that, then that's when they'll start reining in their monetary expansion. But the unemployment itself is a direct result of the whole welfare state regulated society way of life, and minimum wage laws. I mean, there's your one of your biggest causes of unemployment, especially with teenagers in the inner cities, black teenagers, Hispanic teenagers, puts them out of work. And instead of getting rid of the causes of these problems, which of course is the welfare state regulated economy, they do this finagling with the monetary expansion, which creates a whole new host of problems. I'd like to go back in history, because one of the big things that we're always hit with is the Great Depression. And I think it's important to bring the libertarian perspective on here because it's certainly not going to be the perspective that you ever read about in the New York Times or on the talk shows on Sunday in the mainstream media. That, what we're all inculcated with as we're growing up is that the Great Depression was the failure of free enterprise. That America's free enterprise system had failed, and Roosevelt had to come in with his New Deal to save free enterprise. And so we've been inculcated with this notion that the entire welfare state, here were the roots of Social Security and indirectly Medicare and Medicaid that would come in 20 years later, 25 years later under Lyndon Johnson, the minimum wage laws, the economic regulations, that all this was saving free enterprise. And it was all a lie. And they had to tell the lie because if Americans had known what really happened, there might have been a revolution. I mean, there were people jumping out of multi-story buildings committing suicide who had lost fortunes. My grandfather, he had the second largest insurance agency in Texas. He lost everything. And why is this so? This was because of the Federal Reserve System. That had come into place in the 1913, I think it was, and supposedly to stabilize the monetary system, but it didn't stabilize the monetary system. You have this huge monetary expansion in the 1920s. They panicked because, of course, they were concerned about gold runs because we were on the gold standard at that time. So they constricted the money supply. That's what caused the stock market to crash in 1929. And I think that's the important thing that we've got to keep emphasizing here, that the great example that they use as to why you need a Federal Reserve and why you need all these regulations, the Great Depression, was really a direct result of the Federal Reserve, and then exacerbated and made worse by all of the regulations and welfareism.
Good point. The Fed opens up in 1914. The bill's passed at the very end of 1913, just before Christmas. And it's signed by Wilson as a favor to big business. In fact, the headlines of the day even said, Wilson says this is the first step in his pro-business policy. And then the policies followed by the Fed in the 20s, after World War I, and after the recession of 2021, was to keep interest rates down to stimulate business and also to stimulate loans to foreign borrowers. So it was all aimed at a pro-business, I would say, corporatist policy. And of course, that leads to the distortions in prices and interest rates that we talked about. And things were bound to collapse since they were built on this sort of artificial, distorted price system to begin with. Then, of course, it gets exacerbated by the fact that Hoover and Roosevelt, instead of just stepping aside and clearing away taxes and impediments to economic growth, they just pile on, beginning with Hoover. I mean, the New Deal begins with Hoover. The great myth is that Hoover was a laissez-faire advocate, but there's plenty of material people can find on the internet that will document that in fact is not the case. So it's the same old story. The belief that somehow money is the key here, that and the government knows when there's too much, and the government knows when there's too little, and it can be counted on, or the central bank can be counted on to get it just right. There's a beautiful paper that was written, published last year, I think it was, by Larry White and George Selgin and I think it's William Lestraps, I hope I have his first name right. Three monetary economists, excellent ones, who do a report card on the Fed, through its entire 100 years, or roughly 100 years, and comparing the economic, the economy in the Fed era from the pre-Fed era, which was not an era of free banking. Let's be honest about this. Throughout American history, there's been we have had central banks or quasi-central banks, and we've had regulations of banking at the federal and state levels. This is hardly ever had a free market in banking. But they do compare the pre-Fed era to the Fed's era, and the Fed's performance does not look very good compared to the pre-Fed time. Even if you ignore the interwar period, which is sometimes considered the practice round for the Fed because it was new. So a lot of economists will say, well, we can't take the period between the wars that seriously because it was just getting its legs and learning the ropes and all that. But even if you do that, recessions are longer, are deeper, take more time to recover from. I mean, it's not a good sign. Plus, and this should be the killer argument, since 1913 or 14, the value of the dollar has plummeted to about 4 or 5 cents. It's lost 95 or more % of its value. I don't know what you'd have to say to impugn an institution like the Fed. Besides that ought to be the end of the discussion.
Well, and how many lives they've ruined with people on fixed incomes and others that depend on a stable value of their money. I mean, how many lives they've ruined, and look what Roosevelt was doing. I mean, to me, it's still shocking the fact that he would seize people's private holdings of gold. I mean, this had been the official money for the American people for over 100 years. I mean, this is what the Constitution established, that, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a medium of exchange. And why did the framers do that? Because they didn't want irredeemable paper money. They knew what governments do with inflation. They knew the risks involved with that kind of system. And so that was why they made gold and silver coins the legal money of the United States. Now, when we talk about a gold standard, the statists sometimes say, oh, well, no, this meant that paper money was backed by gold. That's not what it meant. It meant that gold coins and silver coins were the standard. That was the money that was being used. And it was to protect themselves from politicians and bureaucrats that would use irredeemable paper money to inflate and confiscate and plunder people. And so here, after 100 years of this official money, Roosevelt goes in there and seizes it, confiscates it. It's no different what Fidel Castro would do later on in all these socialist regimes in Latin America and elsewhere, seizing people's private property and then making it a felony offense to own gold. I mean, it's just so stunning that this type of thing would happen. And it was all with the design that the federal government would have the power and the ability to inflate to its heart's content. And that's effectively what they've done. I mean, it's easy to look at the short term here, like the Fed's we're going to increase inflation by 2% a year. But as you point out, let's judge them by their entire history, from 1914 all the way to the current day. And all you see is plundering and looting, ruination, debasement, destroying people's savings, destroying the ability to save, to the point, as you point out, that the dollar is worth about, 5% of what it was worth in 1914. I mean, by their fruits you will know them, and these are their fruits, Sheldon. They're bitter fruits.
Yeah, we need to acknowledge, too, that times have changed. Understand the Fed better than they used to understand it. The 20s, it was still pretty new, and even in the 70s, when the United States hit double-digit inflation, price inflation, it was that was a new experience. Today, people are much more savvy. Certainly, investors and lenders are much more savvy. The Fed is because of high tech, the internet, and all. People are watching the Fed more closely than ever. They get very early notification when the Fed is changing policy, changing gears, and so an expected announced inflation is going to immediately be incorporated into people's behavior, including prices, including interest rates. So if people if people are told it's now going to be a 2% price inflation because of the government's policies, people will adjust their interest rates. In other words, it won't keep interest rates down. It will cause people to put in an inflation premium so they don't get screwed by the inflation. Investors know the difference between real and nominal rates. And so we can expect, since they're purposeful human beings, we can expect them to adjust their behavior. So, there's been very good work done by Jeffrey Rogers Hummel, a very good banking economist and historian of U.S. banking at the San Jose State University in California, pointing out that even during the 70s, when inflation was very high for the American experience, the payoff to the government was not very high in the form of seniorage and even the monetization of the debt because interest rates were going up as well. And so it doesn't pay. Inflation doesn't pay the government the way it used to. In order to get any benefit out of it, the government itself would have to have a very sudden, totally unanticipated and very high injection of money that caused prices to go up quickly. But that, I wonder whether the Fed could even pull that off if it wanted to, because there are Fed watchers all over the place, and the amount of transparency really is quite high in this regard, and people are able to shift out of the dollar very easily, because since the 80s there's been a lot of deregulation and deregulation and globalization, which has lowered exchange controls or abolished them in a lot of places. So it's easy for people, given also computers, to move from the dollar to something else. So I don't even know that they can accomplish what they say what they may be trying to accomplish.
Well, that's true. There's always those people that are at the bottom of the economic ladder, the very poor, the ones that are not real astute, that can't keep up with all this stuff. And they're the ones that are going to get paid the price, they're putting their money in fixed income investments thinking, oh, well, this is a safe thing to do. And they're the ones that are going to get burned, which is pretty standard for the course. What I find interesting is that this is essentially the system that Friedman was advocating as part of his paradigm, a fixed increase of inflation per year. But to Friedman's credit, and later on in his life, I remember seeing an op-ed, I think it was in the Journal, in which he said, okay, this is what I advocate, but he put it in parentheses, my real preference, my ideal, is to abolish the Fed. And that's, of course, what we libertarians advocate. This is just monetary central planning. It's no different from any other kind of socialist central planning. You've got this commissar of board members, these board members who are effectively monetary commissars, deciding what should be the proper amount of money, what interest rate should be set. And the economy is so complex they can't possibly do this accurately. And that's, of course, what happened in the Great Depression. They screwed up. And you're right, they're a little bit more savvy, but people are more savvy, as you point out, and this simply cannot work. And this is why we libertarians say, look, abolish the Fed, separate money in the state, get rid of any government involvement in the monetary sphere. What will that mean? I mean, this was essentially Hayek's notion of the denationalization of money. What then will be the money? It may be gold coins, it may be silver coins, but you don't know. You don't know what the market brings into existence and what it will bring into existence. That's the beauty of the market, that whatever the best medium of exchange will be, that's what will be ferreted out in the marketplace. And that's what's so different about us libertarians as compared to statists, both conservatives and liberals. We're not willing to settle for a Federal Reserve and try to tell them how to do their business. We want to raise people's vision to a higher level, and that involves a total separation of money in the state.
Well, what that demonstrates is that the argument has to be going on at an even deeper level than that, and that the Fed is even not the most fundamental level. They don't the people we're engaged with don't understand spontaneous order, because they assume money is part of an infrastructure that has to be essentially planned. and namely by some government authority. They don't understand markets as spontaneous orders, so they don't understand money as emerging naturally on the market without a central hand, planning it. If they don't understand that, they're certainly not going to understand our argument about why the Fed should get abolished. So that means we have to go deep with these people and go really back to square one and explain to them what Bastiat and those great economists of the classical economists both in England and France, Scotland were explaining that things do operate as if there's an invisible hand. We have to be clear that that's a metaphor. That's not meant literally. There's nothing mystical about it, but there is spontaneous order that comes out of people pursuing their objectives and coordinating with other people in ever more complex ways, so that all these people have a better chance of obtaining their goals. And that's where markets and prices and money come from. And therefore, it's superfluous and it's harmful for government to step in and think it needs to provide what the market can provide naturally. So that's really where the argument has to be. If we just argue the Fed, they won't get it, because their premise is that, but money is a creation of government. So how can you say just the government should let it alone? If we leave the premise unexamined, they're never going to understand our point about the Fed.
Yeah, that is a great point. I mean, I really think that that's one of the distinguishing characteristics between libertarians and statists, is that we have an understanding of the market process and we have a faith in the market process. They have no faith. Statists it scares them to death. The idea that people should just be free to engage in economic enterprise without government watching over them and controlling them and regulating them and forcing them to be good to their neighbors by sharing their money with others. They have absolutely no faith in freedom and the free market process. And we do. And it's not some kind of mystical faith. It's simply that we understand how life operates, that if you leave people free to just pursue happiness each in his own way, they will figure out how to dovetail their plans with others in the marketplace, buying and selling, trading or whatever, offering their goods and services, and that you end up with this intricate, complex system simply by virtue of the fact that everybody's seeking happiness in his own way, that you don't need a government planner to be in this, and that as soon as you do get a government planner, it's going to start distorting things. It's going to start plundering people, looting people. And that's really what this inflation really is, as you said at the beginning. It's a way to loot people. It is a tax. It's an easy way for government to get goods and services by simply printing the money. It doesn't go out and seize the money through the IRS, which of course it is doing. But taxes reach a certain point. People get upset with more tax increases. So they say, well, this is an easy way to go out there and start paying off our debt and getting goods and services without having to directly tax people. They won't know what's going on. They'll just see prices rising. They'll blame it on the service station owner or the retailer that's raising his prices. And so, I think we need to show people that this is all part of the whole welfare warfare state, that you've got a Federal Reserve here and an IRS that is an integral part of their system, of this statist paradigm, and that in the libertarian system, we're talking about economic liberty, where you have a separation of economy in the state, separation of healthcare in the state, separation of charity in the state, and separation of money in the state.
Yeah, and I think I want to make sure we don't let business off the hook, especially banks, and particularly big banks. I mean, they're the ones that gave us the Fed. The Morgan interests and other big bankers felt they were losing influence as the 19th century was coming to a close, and they wanted to do something about it. They wanted to cartelize banking, and they couldn't have done it on their own, and so they enlisted progressive intellectuals to talk about how important this is, and that's how we end up with the Fed. So this has been delivered to us by, we could say, big business or big banking, and I don't see them calling for an end to the Fed. This is not the Fed wasn't some sort of a Marxist plot against the free economy. It was business people who don't want a free economy because competition is risky. You can lose your market share under competition, and people don't generally like to lose market share, and such people have not ever been averse to asking the government to protect them from upstart competitors. And, they're not in our camp on this, and I think we ought to point that out. The New York Fed is a close partner with the big Wall Street banks. Everybody knows that. If you look at who serves on boards and rotating personnel going from one sector to the other sector. It's a revolving door. It's been pointed out many times. There have been a great series of pictures on Facebook showing the overlap between big business and big banking on the one side and government posts on the other side. This is the corporate state. This is what we're fighting, the corporate state. We're not fighting populist populists who want to nationalize the economy. The populists, I think, originally opposed the Fed, while the progressives, on the other hand, which were much more closely aligned with these big prominent businessmen and bankers, were in favor of it. So it helps to know the players and what side they're on and who our natural allies are and who our opponents are.
Yeah, good point. Well, on that note, we've about run out of time, but I wanted to remind everyone that we've got our Libertarian Angle tour next week. Sheldon and I are going to go to 5 college campuses in the Southeast. We're going to be doing an automobile trip here from college campus to college campus. The whole schedule's on our website at fff.org. If you live in these areas or if you're visiting these areas, come by and join us. They're not limited to college students. It'd be great to have some libertarians there that are been part of our longtime supporters, interact with the kids there. And we're going to have a great time. It's not going to be the standard lecture format that sometimes can get a little bit tedious. We're going to have a conversation like we're doing here, but it's going to orient around basic libertarian principles, how they're applied to the burning issues of the day. So we're going to be engaging these students in conversation in terms of libertarianism, how it applies to what's going on in the world today. And we're going to have a fantastic Q&A session. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We hope you'll join us. Thanks for your support for making this happen. And that's the Libertarian Angle. Until next time, this is Jacob Hornberger and Sheldon Richmond for the Libertarian Angle.